because the left has been so effective at calling everyone racist and bigots and homophobes and the rest of it, that stops a lot of good people from leaving.
To get Brexit done.
Make America great again.
No, no, no.
Hello, this is Stephen Edginton for The Sun, and today I'm interviewing Dave Rubin. Dave Rubin is the host of the Rubin Report, a massive podcast out in the US. He launched it 5 years ago, completely revolutionary to how people view content and really was taking on the mainstream media over there. But recently he's written a book called Don't Burn This Book, which is about his political journey from left to what he describes as classical liberalism. You can watch Burning Questions every week. We're back. The lockdown has not stopped us from producing these videos, so you can watch all of them in the link in the description below. Thanks so much, Dave Rubin, for joining us.
My pleasure. Good to be with you.
Okay, let's start by talking about your book, Don't Burn This Book. It's all about, or part of it's about, your journey from the political left to what you call classical liberalism. Can you explain that journey to people who don't know who you are, for example?
Sure. So I grew up as what I would say is sort of a factory settings lefty, which I think most people in the United States grow up as, and I'm guessing you guys have probably a similar version of this in the UK, that factory settings, what I mean by that, it's like when you buy a brand new television or you buy a brand new computer, there are just the standard settings that come with that thing. And then it's your job to up the contrast, change the volume, change the brightness, the rest of it. And I think that's also how you should operate with whatever your philosophy is, whatever your thoughts are, whatever your belief system is. And the factory settings that most of us are brought up with are something like this in an American context. It's something like Democrats are good, Republicans are bad, liberals and lefties like poor people, Republicans like money, Democrats are against war, Republicans are for war. Basically like a series of very 2D arguments that kind of sound right, that culture hands you, movies hand you, TV hands you, the education system, the political establishment, the whole thing sort of frames everything like that. So I would say I grew up as sort of a standard lefty. And about 5 years ago, I was working at the Young Turks Network, which is a pretty far left progressive network. And I thought that progressivism was sort of liberalism on steroids, meaning they were always very angry. They were screaming. Everyone who was against them was a racist and a bigot and a homophobe. And they were very morally right, and everyone else was very evil and wrong. And that's a pretty empowering thing to be part of. There's something sort of sexy about it. It's like these people are on this mission, and it's the good mission. They're fighting the good fight. Now, the thing is that after you get through that sort of thin veneer of fake morality, the rest of it falls apart very quickly. So about 4 years ago, I started waking up to a lot of this stuff. And I just started talking about it. I started seeing that my own side, the liberals, were no longer acting liberally. Liberals were shouting people down on campus. Liberals were calling everyone racist. Liberals were trying to get people fired and professors silenced, and a series of things. And you can watch videos where I was saying, hey, guys, I'm a lefty. Let's fix this thing. Let's not go crazy. And a lot of that had to do with the rise of Donald Trump and the way that they were reacting towards him and the way he was instigating them and the whole thing. And basically my journey, once I started talking about that, what I found was people on the right, so conservatives, libertarians, and what I would say are more old school liberals. You guys in the UK have a better understanding. When I say classical liberal, I'm talking about an old school liberal, a John Locke style liberal, meaning you believe in individual rights, everyone should be treated equally under the law, and the light touch of government. That's what I mean by when I say old liberal or old school liberal or classical liberal, that's what I mean. And what I have found is on the right, when you start talking about what you think, classical liberals, libertarians, conservatives, they'll agree to disagree. They will welcome you with open arms. I mean, in my book, I lay out a lot of things that conservatives are not going to like. I lay out a pro-choice argument in my book. That is the biggest no-no for conservatives. That is the rail you do not touch with them. And yet all of my allies on the right seem to welcome me, and they're happy to debate those topics and agree to disagree and understand that you want to live in a country with people that think differently than you. Where on the left, even though I have several principles that are thought of as lefty principles in terms of gay marriage, in terms of marijuana legalization, pro-choice, I'm for some level of state education, I'm against the death penalty. Those are things that are supposed to be lefty things. all I get is hate from the left, because the left has become, unfortunately, very monolithic in its thinking. And if you don't check off the 10 things that they want, the moment they check them off, they kick you out. So the book really is about my adventure in finding out that maybe your enemies, your intellectual enemies, or the guys that you thought were the bad guys or were wrong about everything, aren't so wrong about things. But then once you start waking up to it, how the mob will attack you, how personal friends will attack you, and just it's a guide on how to escape some of the madness.
So obviously you talk a lot about your own experiences, and I think that probably one of the reasons that you do that is to sort of touch in on a zeitgeist of millions of other people who might potentially feel that they've, as you describe it, sort of be in the political closet. But there are some people on the left today who might say that actually, Dave, you talk a lot about coming out of the political closet, coming to say that you're a classical liberal. They would say, well, actually, you're not really a classical liberal, or this term is sort of a fake term. You're still in the closet. You're actually sort of a Republican or a conservative. And I have to say that in the UK, you would probably fit into the Conservative Party very, very, very well. I mean, like, they're pro-choice and all that stuff. So can you just answer that point about, first of all, why do you think so many people are in the political closet? And second of all, why do they accuse you of still being a Republican, still being a conservative?
Yeah, so I'll address the second part first, and that's interesting. So and this is why talking about things from a UK and American perspective, when we use some of these terms, classical, liberal, conservative, it doesn't mean exactly the same thing, because virtually every conservative, every self-identified conservative in an American context is pro-life. As I'm saying, that's like the biggest one for them. The fact that your conservatives are more pro-choice is really interesting, but it's important that we make that distinction. Otherwise, people won't know exactly what we're saying. Look, if the things that I just laid out that I'm for, the lefty cred that I just said, again, for gay marriage, for legalization of marijuana at a state level, against the death penalty, I'm for some level of public education, as I said, I'm for dignity with death. You should be able to make decisions for your life or your family's life at the end. If all of those things are tolerated by the conservatives, which, by the way, conservatism is an ideology. Being a part of the Republican Party, that's a party platform. I don't consider myself a Republican. I don't consider myself a Democrat. But if the ideas that I just laid forth that are different than the conservatives, if the conservatives will welcome me onto their side of the aisle, then I have no problem saying I'm a conservative. But it doesn't quite make sense, though, because of the differences that I just laid out there. But what I would say is something like this. I would say I'm sort of a modern conservative. Meaning by modern conservative, I mean, you don't have to believe in absolutely everything they believe. And I stake out those positions in this book, but they'll tolerate your ideas and be happy to debate those ideas with you. So I certainly am not a Republican in that I am not subscribing to the party platform or something like that. I also just think it's foolish to have to say you're a Democrat or a Republican. I don't like that idea. What I like is that if you have a political philosophy that makes sense, then you can figure out where you sort of fall on the map. What was the first part of that again, since I did the second part first?
That's all right. There are millions of people in the political closet. Why?
Oh, so that really, in many ways, is the thesis of the book. I think what has happened here is that most people do not believe everything that the right or Republicans or conservatives say, and most people do not believe everything that the left or liberals or Democrats say, or the Labor Party in your case. Most people don't. They have some mix of things. So it's like, just because you're for gay marriage, that in and of itself doesn't say what you should believe about taxes. Yet somehow we've been tricked to thinking that if you're for gay marriage, you have to be a Democrat, and that means you have to be for high taxes. I mean, none of these things actually make sense. I mean, that's why the subtitle of the book is Thinking for Yourself. You should be able to decouple these issues so that you can think about them clearly. I think the reason that so many people are in the political closet is because, as I said before, with this sort of factory settings thing, most people come from a lefty perspective growing up. And I think what happens is, because the left has been so effective at calling everyone racist and bigots and homophobes and the rest of it, that stops a lot of good people from leaving. Because even once they wake up and they go, whoa, maybe that's not exactly the truth, they know what will be used against them, because they've been doing it to other people. So I think people put themselves in the closet. And that's what I'm trying to show people. You can get out. And it will not be easy. You know, I lay out many things in this book that happened to me personally. It will not be easy when you have mobs online trying to get you fired from your job, when you have, in my case, literally people that were invited to my wedding that were suddenly telling me I'm a racist bigot, and they can never tell you why, but they just know that you are, and a series of other things. So I want to give people enough tools so that they can be brave enough to hopefully start coming out of that political closet. And by the way, although I write most of this from leaving the left political closet, there's a version of this on the right too. And if you feel that everyone you know absolutely demands that you believe in every conservative value that they hold, well, you should leave that closet too. That's not exactly what this book is, but I think the lessons are probably the same.
Well, I think these ideas of sort of label, conservative, liberal, they're almost part of this identity politics, quite divisive argument, you could say. I mean, those on the left who accuse you of being a conservative or Republican may just want to sort of put you in that category when maybe those terms aren't that useful, because we're all individuals, and as you say, we may not agree with everything on one philosophy or another philosophy. One thing I really want to understand is, since 2016, I think there's been a real revolution, a political and cultural revolution, probably going back far further than that. But I think 2016 really was the year in the West, in Britain and America, where you saw these political revolutions come out. You saw Trump elected, you saw Brexit happen. Even since then, we've seen Boris Johnson be re-elected or elected in 2019, and we've seen Bernie Sanders in America. He's failed twice. Jeremy Corbyn in Britain failed twice. Yet, your book is all about how there's this huge culture war going on all around the world. So what I want to know is, why is there a difference between who wins politically in these elections and the kind of social domination of liberals in the arts and the media and in sort of society itself?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I'm super interested in this. And I also think it's really fascinating that it's happening worldwide, as you mentioned. This isn't just happening here. Australia also had a win by the right. Israel's right has been strengthened. We're seeing this all over the place. India has a version of this. And partly that's because of this thing, right? Like, we are now all connected all the time because we have the world in our pocket. And if I tweet out something right now, I could have 10,000 people in a country that I've never been to, that's 6,000 miles away from my house, start, agreeing with me, disagreeing with me, or a series of other things. So as for the disconnect, what you're really talking about is the disconnect between what seems to be the political or the cultural establishment, which is very left, which has been sort of pushing identity politics down our throats, which has been pushing globalism down our throats. And of course, Brexit was a real push against globalism. I'm not from the UK, so I don't purport to give you guys advice, but I suspect that if I lived in the UK, I would have been completely pro-Brexit. That's congruent with everything that I believe, meaning I believe you should be governed as locally as possible. The idea that a citizen in London would have a bureaucrat in Brussels making decisions over their lives seems very dangerous to me. But the way Brexit was framed by the media was somehow that it was just these racists and bigots that were for Brexit. And we hear this all the time. It's only racists and bigots that are for Donald Trump. And then you find out that half the country voted for him. And I think right now he has far more support than half the country because people are tired of this stuff. So I think what happened is the media establishment and academia and the rest of it, they overplayed their hand. I think there was a certain amount of identity politics that would have been tolerable, but they kept pushing this stuff down our throats to the point that you weren't allowed to say, if you say right now in America, men and women have different biological differences, that they're different biologically. We all know this is true. We all know this is true. That is not a smash or an attack on trans people. I have nothing but empathy and sympathy for trans people. I would want any trans person to be treated equally under the law and get whatever help that they needed to live a full, actualized life. But I think the media played it so hard that, like we had this issue with the baker with the gay cake wedding here, the gay wedding cake. And it was like it wasn't that he stopped people from just walking into his store and buying any cake. It was that they wanted him to personalize a cake for their wedding. And I would never force anyone to do something artistic. You know what I mean? He wasn't stopping them and saying, oh, you can't buy anything here that's on the shelves. It was that he was going to have to do something that violated his religious rights. Now, I may not his religious beliefs. I may not subscribe to those religious beliefs, but I understand to live in a free society, I have to allow other people to have their own beliefs, and I can't push my beliefs on them, just like I wouldn't want them to push it on me. So I think what we're seeing worldwide is that the mainstream media and the political establishment completely overplayed their hand. They thought they could silence everybody by calling most of us bigots and racists for caring about immigration or borders or economics or whatever the issue might be, something as simple as noting that men and women are different biologically. And I think by overplaying their hand, they led to the rise of a lot of this populist stuff, which, by the way, I think is basically good. I think there is a way it could veer out of control, for sure. I mean, populism always has a moment where it could tip over into something sort of dangerous. But I think most importantly right now, independent nations doing what's best for their nation, of course, I think that's the right thing to do. I don't have any right over your life, and you don't have any right over my life. We live in different countries. We can exchange ideas, but I think allowing countries to make whatever decisions are best for themselves and removing some of the top-down power, which that's what Brexit is, that's what Trump is, I think that's basically good.
I have to admit, I mean, I'm an avid watcher of the Rubin Report and the sort of intellectual dark web, those Ben Shapiro types. I think there are so many people out there, you know, young people who are watching these videos, and it's fascinating to see the rise of this alternative media. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I just want to hone in on one of the points you made there about the gay wedding cake, which I find interesting. We actually had a similar case in Northern Ireland, and I know you write about it in your book quite a bit. So I was watching an interview with Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson, and Joe Rogan asked him, I think he said something like, when was the last time you changed your mind on something? And Jordan Peterson mentioned this issue, and he said, well, someone phrased the question as, if that person refused to bake a cake for a black person, what would be your reaction then? So I just want to put that same question to you. If that person, you know, refused to bake a cake for a black person, would that be any different?
So it's a great question. So first off, we have the Civil Rights Act of 1963, I think. It might be 1964. And you're not allowed to refuse service based on the color of someone's skin. Now, there's a libertarian argument that is against that. I'm not for that, actually. This is where I would say I have some guardrails that a pure libertarian doesn't. The pure libertarian argument would be, you just let the market decide. So if somebody's truly a racist baker and doesn't want a black person to walk into their store, that actually eventually that store would fail because the market would, you know, because people wouldn't want to support a racist. I think intellectually that's an interesting argument, but I'm not for relitigating that. The difference in this case was that he was being asked to do something that wasn't on his shelves. It was something specific. So here's how I would give you a metaphor or a parable to this, would be that, let's say there was an artist online. There are many of these types of people, an Etsy artist, you know, someone that has a Shopify account, something, who does custom paintings. And let's say a neo-Nazi said to them, I want you to paint Jews in the gas chamber with swastikas all over it. And it turned out that the artist was Jewish. No one in their right mind would force that artist to do that painting. So I think that concept is the way we have to look at this. I am not for people being forced to do things. It doesn't mean I'm defending the person or the ideology behind it. But I just don't see that the state can force someone to do something with their art specifically. But again, that's separate than the 1963 Civil Rights Act.
So it's the kind of idea of being compelled to do something that maybe you don't like, compared to sort of, you know, refusing to serve someone, for example.
Yeah, and by the way, I know that's a bit of a messy answer. That's not a perfectly satisfying answer, right? Because the answer that we all want is, no, that person's a racist and they should just have to make the cake and they should have to do it and they're a bigot and just have to do it. Now, I understand the impulse there, but we shouldn't be reacting on our impulse. The simple truth is, if that person is a bigot, whoever they're against, and they don't want to do it, well, first off, I don't think most people go into business to be bigots. I think that most people go into business to make money. But that doesn't mean, just because someone is not a good person, it doesn't mean that gives us the excuse to use state power. So again, it's a messy answer because it takes nuance into it. And unfortunately, most people don't want to deal with nuance.
That's right. We like nuance.
Yeah,
Let's go
I
back.
like nuance. Yeah.
Let's go back to the whole idea of populism. That was a slight tangent there, but I thought it would be interesting to get your view on it. But
Sure.
do you think that these populist revolutions, I would describe them as, that we've seen across the Western world, do you think that goes into the heart of your argument of you see because let's say you go on Twitter, right? And I spend far too much time on Twitter, and if you think if you go on Twitter too much, you kind of get the feeling that everyone's kind of against you, and there's all these, the majority of people are sort of far left kind of, or even left wing people. But then when it comes to election day, and I think we had the same, and this is why the media can't predict these elections. 2019 election, no one was expecting Boris Johnson to get a huge landslide. No one expected Trump. No one expected Brexit to happen. Because people spend so much time on these social media platforms, you kind of expect everyone, the majority of people, to be left wing. So does this kind of go into the heart of the argument of your book, where you've got millions of people in the closet, the media doesn't know about them, even they might not, they might not be honest with everyone about their real beliefs, but in the ballot box where it's secretive and it's your own personal view, that's when they shine and that's when they come out, and that's why we get so many surprising election results.
Yes, I think that very much is the right prescription there. I think a lot of people are afraid to say what they think. I think the big tech game, I mean, we could also add that, it's at least partly rigged. We don't know if the numbers we see on retweets and everything else are real numbers. We know that they manipulate numbers. We know that the algorithm manipulates what videos you're watching and what videos you're fed and the rest of it. So the whole game is very amorphous. It's very hard to define. And I think a lot of people, either they're using fake accounts, often just to mess with people, or they just check out altogether. But you could look at it, a version of it would be something like this. Bernie had a tremendous amount of support on Twitter, and I didn't see any support for Biden on Twitter. There were Bernie bros on Twitter. I find them to be the worst of the worst. They claim they're tolerant and diverse and all this stuff, but I found them to be just the absolute worst type of Twitter people there are. But I acknowledge that they exist, actually, in large numbers. I couldn't find anyone that really was supporting Biden. Now people are supporting Biden because they're just like, he's not Trump, so we have to come around and try to take out Trump. But I think that the social media game does make a lot of this hard to predict. That being said, you can watch my video that I did with Joe Rogan. I believe it was the day before the 2016 election. And, everybody was saying Hillary's going to win in a landslide. And I was like, I think it's a 50-50. It's a coin flip, because I had listened to people like Scott Adams on Twitter. I had seen what was happening on Twitter, where I did see support for Trump. And it wasn't just because people were racist. It was because they did want to drain the swamp. They wanted something different and the rest of it. So that wasn't proof of anything to me. But at least by paying attention to it and not just saying, these people are all the worst people in the world, they're all deplorables. Well, I was like, there's something happening here, so I wouldn't be surprised. So yes, I think it's very hard now to follow polls or anything like that. It's like, I don't have a landline. And as far as I know, in America, they only do polls by landlines. I haven't had a landline in 20 years. So if I'm never getting polled, who else is not getting polled? So I think the numbers game and the prediction game is getting harder and harder.
I'm glad you mentioned Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. My next questions were really about that and the US election in general. Now, from a Brit, I'm a bit naive in this stuff. I don't follow US politics that closely. I try and follow it as much as I can. But we've seen in the UK, Jeremy Corbyn failed twice. Bernie Sanders failed twice to become the candidate for US president. Are we seeing, and also I want to add in on that question, you've got people like you writing your books, and you've got Jordan Peterson, and you've got Ben Shapiro, and all these amazing, fantastically huge audiences watching kind of the right of centre, conservative voices online. Are we kind of seeing the end, or the beginning of the end of the hard left politically?
Well, I hope so. I genuinely hope so. You may have seen my Twitter thread on January 1st. I always try to put out a thread the first day of the year with some of my predictions, and I've been pretty on it for the last 4 or 5 years about what I've predicted. 2 years ago, I was predicting it was the year of unusual alliances, and suddenly we saw all these people that are supposed to be enemies that were friends. The best example of that I can give is two of my guys in my crew, Ben Shapiro, Orthodox Jew on the right, conservative, and Sam Harris, our most outspoken atheist in America and one of the most outspoken in the world. They disagree on everything, from the nature of reality and belief to every political thing you could think of, from abortion to taxes to everything else. And yet they're allies in the free speech battle. So I think I've had a pretty good track record on this. I sense that my tweet at the beginning of this year was that this is the year that the sort of intersectional wokeness will implode. Now, I didn't predict COVID, but what my feeling was, at least from an American perspective, was that the competing interests of intersectionality, Black people should think this, gay people should think this, white people are the worst of all, white Christians are the worst and just have to be quiet. And there's the whole competing interest of it, while also going through a democratic election, that it could not stand. It's a house of cards, and the base was too quicksandy to stand. And I think we, in many ways, have seen it collapse. Right now in America, the idea of identity politics for most people is completely absurd, because we have a real problem, just like you guys have, just like everyone in the world has. And when you have real problems, suddenly debating gender pronouns feels pretty ridiculous. And the idea that you would care whether the people who cure COVID or come up with the right antibodies or who figure out how to get us out of quarantine, that you would care whether they're gay or straight or Black or white or Asian or anything else, is patently ridiculous. But we have seen some articles, by the way, in mainstream press about, I hope it's not a straight white man who comes up with it. Or there was a famous picture of Trump's cabinet discussing COVID, and it was mostly white men. There were some women there, which they conveniently crop out of the picture. But it's like people were saying, oh, look, it's all white men that are doing it. And I think the average person looks at that and goes, this is absolutely absurd. Are these people qualified? Nobody cares. And the way I would compare this is that if you had a heart attack today, would you care about the gender or sexual orientation or color of skin of your doctor, or would you want the best doctor? So in many ways, it's the people who purport to be anti-racist who are the racists. No one on the right, as far as I can tell, and I'm not talking about the fringiest KKK people who have no following and no influence, but are propped up by the media to make it seem like everyone on the right is a bigot. No one on the right cares about race, or even at this point, I don't even think they care about sexuality for the most part. There's a small religious contingent that does, but they certainly don't care about gender. And it's the people on the left who purport to be anti-racist who are constantly injecting racism into our society. You guys definitely have a very strong version of that. And I think watching Corbyn collapse is a spectacular thing. I think watching Bernie Sanders collapse is a spectacular thing. And the only other thing I'll say is, from an American perspective, the question now is, well, then what is the Democratic Party? Because the young socialist base did want Bernie. Now, it's hard to tell how real they are because of what you mentioned about Twitter. But like, who really supports Biden? Like, what is that Democrat? What is it anymore? Is it an intersectional leftist who wants the government to do anything? Or is it more of an old school Democrat like JFK? Now, of course, you know which one I would prefer it to be. I'd love it for it to be JFK. But Biden has said some pretty crazy things. He went to this LGBT equality forum, and he said that if you're going to prison, it shouldn't be what your birth certificate says your gender is. It's whatever you say your gender is. Well, then we're going to have a lot of male rapists in female prisons. And that sort of corrosive thinking, I think, is leaving the Democrats not with much right now. So I'm curious to see what will happen after this. Will a phoenix rise from the ashes? Will the old liberals, the old school liberals, will they return, or will they just say, you know what, conservatives, let's figure it out? I suspect it's that. And that sort of is where I'm at with this whole thing.
You've mentioned the dreaded C word. I sort of promised my audience we wouldn't talk about that. But whilst you're on it, in the UK, we've had writers saying, with this COVID-19 response, saying, left-wing writers, we shouldn't have the vaccine come from Oxford because that would be straight white men getting the vaccine. We should have more women at the daily press conferences. Why aren't there enough women making these sort of calls in the UK? I mean, it's absolutely crazy. Surely you want the best people to do the jobs. I think you're totally right. Let's talk about Joe Biden. You mentioned him there. He's a really fascinating character. How does he fit into the culture war? And do you think he'll be replaced before the end of the election period?
Look, it's a great question, and everyone's debating this. Look, first off, I just want to say about Joe Biden personally, I think he's probably a decent human being. Putting aside like the sexual assault allegations and stuff that can't be proven, I think he does love America. He may be more big government than I am at this point, but I think he's a decent human being who's trying to serve his nation. The sad part that's right underneath that is he obviously is having some cognitive problems. I don't mean that to be funny or glib or anything else, but when we see these videos and he can't remember what he's saying, and he fumbles through things, and he screws up words and the rest of it. It's like he should be veering towards retirement right now. He shouldn't be veering towards being the president of the United States, right? And let's not forget, if he had really wanted to be president of the United States, he would have run after Obama finished his 2 terms. Now, his son had just died, and there's some other reasons. So I don't want to like go back in and say, oh, you should have done this, that, and the other thing. But in many ways, his time has passed. And the Democrats, I think, have coalesced around him because they think it's the last chance to do something that will stop the radical leftists. I think that's what it is. So I don't know exactly what your version of this in the UK is, like who are the sort of labor people that might be the anti-Corbyn, which is sort of fascinating to me. But I think that's all Biden is that he's not Trump and he's not Bernie. There is nothing that he is, I don't think, that anyone really believes in. And in many ways, the worst part of this for the Democrats is that it's like Hillary was a pretty bad candidate, and that's why she lost. But at least there was some passion behind her. I don't see any passion behind Biden. And if anything, you now see this weird thing where it's like all the Me Too people who were saying believe all women, now they're supporting Biden and they look like complete frauds too. So he's undermining the very base of ideas that kind of got him there. And as for the second part of your question, whether he will be the nominee, I mean, I think at 75% right now, he either won't be the nominee or he'll be replaced immediately after accepting the nomination. Like they're just trying to get him to that convention. They're just trying to drag him to that convention. And the depressing reality is that if you're a Democrat, if you absolutely hate Trump and you're going to vote Democrat no matter what, well, you should realize you're not voting for Joe Biden. You're voting for whoever the VP is. And in many ways, you're not even voting for the VP. You're voting for whoever the DNC decided Joe Biden's VP is going to be, because I don't think he's really making the decisions. So the whole party is in an absolute mess. And even though I am not of that party anymore, and that's not to say I'm part of the Republican Party, registered as a Democrat. I voted, by the way, in the primary for Joe Biden because it was more of an anti-Bernie vote than anything else. But they've got major existential problems, and I don't know how they get out of it.
So, Dave, you've obviously run the Rubin Report for about 5 years now. Why do you think that shows like yourself, Joe Rogan, things like that, do so well against the mainstream media? What is it about the alternative media that has led to this kind of meteoric rise?
Yeah, I think there's a couple reasons there. I mean, truly, when I started the Rubin Report as a long-form interview show in September of 2015, first off, I was a lefty at the time, as I said. So I was approaching things from what I would say are a moderate lefty position, which was a pretty unique position because of everything we've been talking about here. But really, I think what the trick was everything was getting smaller at the time. Vine videos were 6-second videos, Snapchat, Twitter, everything was becoming smaller and smaller and smaller. It's hard to remember back to 5 years ago what the internet was like because it changes so fast. But things were becoming so small, and all I saw on television were people yelling at each other. You turn on CNN, there's 8 heads in a box. They do a 5-minute segment. Everyone says one thing. Everybody's angry. You feel angry after. You actually feel dumber after. If I turn on CNN now, I feel dumber after. You never feel enlightened. That's not what they're offering. So I thought, well, what happened to the interview show? And it's kind of funny now because everyone's doing an interview show now. It's like I definitely helped blaze that trail. And I don't mind it, by the way. You're obviously a good interviewer, and I really enjoy talking to good interviewers as the subject of the interview. And I always say this, it's like, man, if 1,000 incredible interviewers proliferate and I had something to do with the beginning of it, and then suddenly I kind of don't want to do this anymore, or my job is done, like I will find something else to do. I really mean that. I will. And, maybe what will shift for me is that I'll do less interviewing and I'll do more of the other side of it. I mean, or I'll write more books or I'll just get out of this thing altogether. I wanted to be in the NBA. It's too late for me, but, but I think what we've seen here is basically I started doing this long form thing and I started just treating people respectfully. That was it. I would talk to people I agreed with, talk to people I disagreed with. I've never treated any guest differently than another guest. And I think that then started to bubble up. And then suddenly, I don't want to say that this was all me. Then suddenly, all of these really interesting thinkers and authors and comedians who weren't getting play on mainstream. So, I'm talking about Sam Harris, and from a UK perspective, Douglas Murray, who I think is like the all-star of all-stars and one of the most important voices, certainly that you guys have. But even here in America, I'm thrilled whenever I can amplify the voice of Douglas Murray. But then, Ayaan Hirsi Ali and Peter Boghossian and Michael Shermer, and then of course Jordan Peterson, and all of these interesting people who were talking about things in a mature way. And I think what happened was suddenly people started realizing, well, CNN's making me dumber, everything's making me angry, we're doing all of this short stuff, but there's some interesting people. Some of them are kind of quirky, and Ben Shapiro talks real fast, and Jordan moves his hands a lot, and we all sort of became memes in our own way, even me. But I think people thought, oh, here's a group of people that are trying at least to make some sense of the world. And I think one of the things that we're very short on right now is sense making. We don't have a lot of people that are sense making. We have a lot of partisan people that are always screaming about things, but not a lot of sense makers. So then when you take all of that, and then of course the other piece of it is that when you add the technological aspect, that YouTube was available wherever you are because it's on your phone. You can listen to an audio podcast when you're on the subway, or as you guys call it, the tube, or anywhere else. And I think the technological innovation coupled with the fact that there was like an idea revolution that the mainstream just chose to ignore. Mainstream's up here, idea revolution's happening, and then the tech is growing at the same time, and then they merged into something really beautiful. And the only thing I'm worried about right now is that big tech just has so much power over us that they could also turn the pipes off at any moment, which is a whole other issue, but I think something that's seriously important to think about.
Now, you've mentioned there a bit about your next steps, talking about joining the NBA. I think you're right. You're probably quite unlikely to do that anytime soon. But also, not just about your next steps, but also sort of the next steps for the alternative media. What do you think is going to happen to the alternative media, the mainstream media, in the next few years?
Well, I think a lot of it is actually being accelerated right now because of COVID. Because, if you watch, CNN, or for you guys, Sky, or whatever else is there, it's like everyone's broadcasting from home right now. Now, you're home right now. It looks like you're in your house. I'm in my house. This is my garage, but I have a functional TV studio here. So I was a little ahead of the game on building out, a proper studio in the home. But right now we're watching broadcasters, instead of being in multi-million-dollar studios where they've got tons of lights and makeup and huge staffs and everything else, we're watching people broadcast from their kitchen. And I think what that has caused is it's also escalated that situation where the rise of the alternative, and now what's happening is mainstream was collapsing already, but now without their studios and without their makeup and all the technological stuff that they had the advantage on and the big budgets, it's like, whoa, when you just see Anderson Cooper just sitting at home on a webcam, you're like, oh, well, he's just some guy on a webcam. And that doesn't mean he's better or worse than anyone else. So I sense that things are going to continue to collapse on the mainstream media side. I think what the mainstream media will do, if they're smart, is they're going to look at this and go, wow, we are saving a whole hell of a lot of money right now without these giant operations. I mean, my operation here, we have no debt. We're highly profitable. We're a slim, trim business that I use all of my libertarian beliefs to fit into how we go about doing business. And that's why we're thriving the way we are. And I think a lot of networks are going to be like, man, we had huge studios, huge overhead, huge budgets, working with unions, way too many crew members, and we got to cut a lot of that. So I think we are in for a massive sea change in media right now. And for people like us that are a little ahead of the game, I think that's a good sign.
Now, obviously, there's a bit of a difference between the UK's media landscape and the United States' media landscape. Here in the UK, we've got the BBC, where I think you have to pay £150 a year to consume their content. They've got thousands of people working there, and they basically don't do that much. I mean, the BBC News has about 4,500 staff. They basically get no stories. It's really interesting.
Well, I know you guys, especially right-leaning people, have all sorts of frustrations with The Guardian, and I make fun of them all the time. I remember once, I don't remember the specifics of the article, but there was a hit piece that they wrote about the intellectual dark web and my whole crew, and it was just like an endless series of personal attacks, and they didn't even give a writer's name. They didn't even credit a writer with it. And I was like, this is what I always say. It's journalists, and I mean that with the air quotes, journalists, because they're not journalists, they're activists. They're the ones destroying journalism. So it's like, we'll get a lot of hate for, oh, you're attacking the media. Stop attacking the media. We need the media. It's like, I'm not the one destroying the media. They're destroying it themselves. They don't need me. Maybe I'm giving them a little push, but they're the ones sitting there with the kerosene and the match and showing us how bad they are while they burn the whole thing down.
I want to ask about the kind of hyper-partisan element of the media and where has this come from? What do you think it's come from sort of in 2016 when Trump and Brexit won? Was that when they became really hyper-partisan?
It's hard to say where it started exactly. I would say it did start before that, right? Like Trump, I think, was a symptom of it, not the cause of it. And I think a lot of people get confused. I think people look back and they're like, oh, everything was just fine. And then Trump appeared and everything got terrible. And it's like, no, he appeared for a reason. And the issue is that, look, half the country, when Obama was president, I don't blame Obama for this specifically, but half the country felt that they were being called bigots and racists and rednecks and all of that stuff. But it wasn't the half that the media cares about. So we didn't hear it a lot, right? The media elite, they don't care about those people. So they pretended that there was no problem. Trump, I think, saw that and then flipped the whole thing. So now the media thinks that there's a major problem because they're the ones under attack. So I think that sort of goes to the, one of Trump's biggest strengths, which is just understanding the tide, sort of. So I don't know that there's like a real moment that you can point to. There's a series of moments, say the Jussie Smollett thing, which was a major, racial hoax that we had here, and a bunch of other things, the Brett Kavanaugh hearings and the way that the media treated that versus the allegations against Joe Biden, that then just wake people up to what reality is, or as the kids call it, taking the red pill.
Now, you mentioned quite a few of these incidents in your book. You talk about the Covington kids, where the media basically just flat out lied about that incident. Do you think that the mainstream media's credibility is totally shot? And do you think that's part of the reason why shows like yourself and Joe Rogan and things like that do so well at the moment?
Pretty much, yes. Pretty much, yes. Now, that isn't to say that there are no good journalists. Of course, there are some good journalists. And when I attack the media, I always qualify it by saying, I wish I didn't have to attack the media. I don't consider myself a journalist, and yet I'm put in a position where I have to say things that the media won't say. That's not even what I want to do. I'm not a journalist. A true journalist, you're on the ground, you're a fact finder, you're trying to get to the truth, not to create a fiction that fits your worldview, but that's what much of the media has become. So when the Covington story looked like it was a young white Christian Trump supporter attacking an elderly Native American man, well, what happened? The media went crazy with it. Every lefty politician, from Nancy Pelosi to Bernie Sanders to AOC, this proves what a racist, patriarchal place America is. And then, of course, it turns out to be false, and none of them apologize or anything else. And the media has just smashed an egg on their own face. And then what happens? It happens exactly again with Jussie Smollett. I forget which one was first, actually, but it's just like a series of these things that it happens over and over. And the media loves to cover stories that fit their narrative. But when a story doesn't fit their narrative, so for example, the sexual assault allegations against Joe Biden, well, they don't cover it for weeks. And then everyone online that sees that it's happening is going, guys, why aren't you doing your job? And in the book, as you know, I lay out 4 types of fake news. And one of the types of fake news that I'm most interested in, actually, is what the media ignores. Because people think of fake news as, oh, it's just a fake story, or the headline doesn't match the content of the article. Those are types of fake news. But the much more dangerous types of fake news are the stories that, as an average person, they just don't let you see. So again, that also goes to why the online media versus the mainstream media thing is really rattling right now.
Now, to finish off the interview, I want to talk a bit more about your book. Really simple question. Why did you write the book?
It's funny, when I wrote the book, as I lay out right in the beginning, I was supposed to write Why I Left the Left, because that's a phrase that's been attached to me. I did a PragerU video that has like 20 million views, and a lot of people see me as the guy that left the left. And, I survived and I thrived, even though, even as I'm talking to you right now, there's a massive online coordinated mob trying to wreck our Amazon reviews and wreck our reviews at all the retailers. And it's kind of funny because that's the point of the book. I don't expect this to be 1941 Germany where people are going to literally burn the book. But a new form of book burning is when mobs ascend on these retailers just to wreck reviews so that someone else won't buy the book. Because when you burn a book, you're trying to hide ideas. And that's exactly what these people are doing to me right now, which sort of, it's perfect. Like, it's like life imitating art or art imitating life. I'm not sure which one it is. But why I wrote it really was, I was going to write the Why I Left the Left book. And I wrote that for about 3 weeks. And then I realized, I don't want to write what I'm against. I want to write a book about what I'm for. And that really is what this book is. I lay out all of my political positions, my classically liberal beliefs. But more than that, I'm not telling you that you have to believe all of these things. I'm not trying to convince a conservative to be pro-choice. I'm really not. I'm not trying to convince a religious person that they have to be for gay marriage. What I'm trying to do is show people that you should have a political lens that you view the world through that makes logical sense. And don't feel like you have to check off every box on this side or every box on this side. We can put together a piece that is your own piece and think about it for yourself. It doesn't mean you're right about everything. Is it possible that 10 years from now, I'm going to look at this and go, my chapter on the little bit that I did on climate change, it's not one of my big pet issues, but the little bit I did on that, has new evidence arisen that has changed my view? Of course that's possible. That is what life is. But we're stuck in this weird thing that if you don't say what you say and demand that you're right and everyone else be damned, then people seem to not know what to do with you. And I think I'm one of those people that publicly is taking that position. And I think a lot of other people are out there that feel the same way. And perhaps more than anything else, that's the point of the book. Step up for yourself. People think, oh, if I just don't say what I think, this will pass. It ain't passing. As you said before, this is a worldwide phenomenon now. The entire world, and especially because of COVID, the entire world is in flux. We all feel it right now. We all feel that the future doesn't feel guaranteed. If we went back to January, nobody would think that we'd all be trapped in our houses in May, and yet we are. So think about your life seriously and think about the best ways that you can live a life that will allow you to flourish and give you purpose and meaning and hopefully enhance the people around you. And that doesn't mean you'll be perfect at it all the time. I'm not perfect at it all the time. But I think there are some tools in this book. And more than anything else, go read 12 Rules for Life too, because I think that Jordan has given more people those tools. And if Jordan was giving the people the tools, I think maybe I gave them the tool belt in this book. And if that is the takeaway, I will be more than happy with it.
Now, it's interesting. I also noticed a lot of similarities between your book and 12 Rules for Life. Both of them start, the chapters are all sort of commandments on ways to make your life better. It's interesting as well because the title of your book links into an incident that we recently had in the UK where basically, I'll explain the incident very briefly, where basically the wife of a cabinet minister, the wife of Michael Gove, tweeted out a picture of their bookshelf. On the bookshelf, there was a book by someone called David Rubin, who is a Holocaust denier. And Michael Gove was a journalist 20 years ago, and he basically bought the book apparently to research David Rubin. Now, you've got people on the left now saying, you can't even own that book, you can't have that book, you can't own books that you disagree with. It's basically going back to, as you say, back to the 1930s where people are actually burning books because they think they're sort of, they're completely and utterly against free speech.
And of course, and so I did see that story actually. And sometimes I'm sure you're the same way. Sometimes you see a story that is important, but just on Twitter, you're like, it's happening in a different country. I got a lot going on. I can't tweet about every single thing. But the absurdity of that, first off, you are allowed to have books that you disagree with, right? I mean, you are allowed to have books. If you read Mein Kampf, it doesn't mean you're a Nazi. You might read it to try to understand why did this person think this twisted, perverse things? Why did he think these things? You might. But also, of course, the hilarity with the far left going crazy about it is the far left was also supporting Jeremy Corbyn, who was surrounding himself with some of the worst bigoted, racist people and people who would absolutely love to exterminate the 6 million Jews who live in Israel and a series of other things. So that is one of the things, I think I say it in the book, that the left finds racism everywhere except where it actually is. And I suspect this is probably one of those cases.
Two final questions. I want to know, do you think that you're on a political mission to basically convert people, leftists, to your side of the argument, bring them into kind of your ideas? Is that what your mission is?
I would say broadly, yes, but that's not really my goal, that I convince them of anything. And that's what I say when I'm saying that I'm genuinely not trying to make the conservatives pro-choice. I'm trying to show them that if we live in a society of 350 million people and not everyone prescribes to your religious beliefs, that we have to have some guardrails on society that are the uncomfortable things, and we can debate when life begins and the rest of it. So to your latter point, I'm not trying to convince everybody of everything that I believe. However, I do believe that modern leftism, what it has become, the collectivist view of the world, the idea that we should be grouped on as purely on our immutable characteristics, and then that the government should basically do everything, decide how we all live, as if the government is somehow inherently good. The government isn't inherently good. It's only good if the men and women who create it are good. And a lot of the leftists, I think, it's not that I don't think they're good people, but I think the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And I think that they're morally confused and everything else. So to the first part of your point, yes, I would love to help be one of the people that dismantles those terrible ideas, because they're like a virus. A virus is easy to catch and hard to get rid of. And that's why those ideas spread with young people, because young people hear things that sort of sound right. Oh, you want to help poor people? Okay, give poor people money. But we know that actually doesn't work. But all of those things, free college for everyone. Well, I want everyone to be educated, but then you go, well, wait, it's not actually free. And when you get to college, then you're just going to be indoctrinated into leftism. So you have to think about these things in a serious way. What the left has done really well is just give you bumper sticker slogans and then hope that you don't think about it, because if you do think about it, you know what they're going to call you? Yeah, a racist and a bigot. So I would love to be one of the people that helps dismantle those ideas. And I think I've been a pretty decent, communicator of that.
Now, final question. You've interviewed so many fascinating people, some of the greatest minds in the Western world. What is the main lesson that you've taken away from that, from interviewing all those people?
Well, I would say, because I didn't really start out to be an interviewer. I was talking on camera. I was originally, when I was with the Young Turks, I was doing sort of a panel, hot topics on The View kind of show. I don't know that I knew exactly what I was getting myself into. I can tell you the greatest lesson that I've learned is that if you genuinely listen to people, you will learn from them. And that doesn't mean that you're always going to learn something good. You sometimes, like when I'm having a great interview, when I find that somebody's really telling the truth, I am so locked in with that person, and you can almost feel it. It is literally almost tangible, the feeling of truth when it starts spreading. It's incredible. To the same point, though, when I'm with someone and you can tell they don't really know what they're saying, they're kind of BSing you through it, and they're not really sure, you can feel that too. And I say this all the time, but you can watch them sort of tie the noose around their neck and kind of hang themselves. And you can learn from that too. So I think more than anything else, my greatest lesson, and I suppose why probably what you said about my book relative to Jordan's. I'm not a psychology professor. I don't think I'm the world's leading intellect like Jordan Peterson, but I've been surrounded by incredible people. And I think I've been able to take some of their best ideas, their best techniques. And I think through that, I've been able to come up with something that is like a cohesive worldview that I know has helped me, and I think can probably help some other people too.
It was a really entertaining book. I really enjoyed reading it. It's actually quite funny when you read it. It's called Don't Burn This Book. Go and buy it on Amazon or any other retailer in the UK or in the US. Thanks so much, Dave Rubin, for joining us.
Thanks. I've really enjoyed this. You're a great interviewer. And by the way, we sold out on Amazon UK within 2 hours.
Wow.
But they are restocking, so it will be there. And I've enjoyed talking to you. And thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.